Okay, just I want to wrap up a bit with saying, please be aware that reasonable accommodation does not only happen at the point of interviewing an applicant with a disability. Okay, it happens when you're going through your job profiling. You don't have to go and readjust and review all of your existing job profiles and do this huge exercise to go, oh, where are we not inclusive? What you need to do is, as you're looking out there for vacancies, as you are addressing a recruitment need or a promotional need, have a look at the job profile as you go and say, this job profile, okay, we've got key requirements of the job, we've got some of the work environment issues. It's always a good idea if you do a reasonable accommodation or an environmental accessibility audit. We do them as part of our service where we go and look at the environment. We do an environmental accessibility audit, but our report is designed to be usable so that your recruiters, your HODs, your line managers can actually have a look at it and go, where are the potential? We've got these 3 candidates applying for a position. All 3 of them have disabilities. I need to explore potential barriers. What are the potential barriers that we might have in our environment? Now we know specifically, and let's open that up to discussion in our interview process. Okay, so job profiling. How we advertise our vacancies. Please don't ever decide which vacancies or which positions in your company are suitable for the disabled. I promise you, if ever you want a discrimination checkpoint, take the word disabled out and put the word black or woman in. If I was to say which positions in your company are suitable for black people, you would have a disaster on your, it smacks of discrimination. Or which positions in our company are suitable for women? It smacks of discrimination. But if you put the word which positions are suitable for the disabled, we think, oh, that's a very logical and practical way to start this conversation. It's not. You cannot possibly decide what people with a disability as a group can do. Okay, at the end of the day, you just cannot decide that because it is such a diverse group of people with different skills and different abilities. Okay, so the interview process, obviously, you need to make sure that you've considered the needs of that individual. If somebody, for example, has a severe stutter, then you make sure that they have a bit of extra time during the interview so that they don't feel pressurized and you can relax a bit about getting through the questions, okay? Your assessments, please, your selection process, your recruitment policies, where they include doing psychometric assessments or skills-based testing, you need to make sure that they are inclusive because we often, I'm an industrial psychologist, and one of the things Bradshaw LeRoux does is we do assessments, learning potential, competency-based, and so on. But you've got to have a conversation because often these tests are the things that are disabling the person. So you might have somebody who's got a motor neuron disability, so they shake a lot, and it's a computer test and it's timed. And you've got to go and make as many selections as you can in 3 minutes. If your hand is shaking and I'm on your laptop and it hasn't been adjusted for that, I'm going to really struggle to go and click on my answers. So I'm going to get less done during the time allocated, which means that I'm going to do worse in the assessment result. And you're going to say, sorry, this person didn't reach the benchmark we need. Whereas in effect, what's actually happened is that the disability has disabled the person and has made the results invalid. Okay. When we talk about workplace diversity, please don't forget the conversation of disability. It fascinates me how many diversity workshops are out there and people are training on diversity and then they bring in the little poor cousin conversation of disability as an add-on. They mention it as trainers, but because they don't really know much about it, they kind of just like whisper it and move on. Okay, our diversity training sessions, we actually use disability as the central point of an example of how stereotypes impact on inclusion and how you can change your thinking and adjust things. So stop whispering disability. Be loud, be confident, be open around it, okay? In your training and career advancements, when you're selecting your training service providers, consider whether they are accessible to the diverse needs of people with a disability. You know, do their training materials come in different options? Do they have audio versions? Are their training venues accessible? Do they have hybrid training solutions? These are all such important ways of saying we would like to support our supply chain and ensure that they are inclusive, not just our company, our whole supply chain, because that will ultimately make your life much easier. Also, retention. Very often when somebody in our organization acquires a disability, our first go-to is to go, okay, we're very sorry about that. We're going to medically board you, and don't worry, you're going to get your insurance payout. But we are letting people with the skills, knowledge, and workplace experience go for no reason. Vocational rehabilitation is so key. You must remember that 70% of your adults with a disability, your adult working age group people, they were not born with their disability, they acquired their disability. And acquiring a disability doesn't mean that all of a sudden you've got all the skills and knowledge in the world that gets downloaded, that you know how to be empowered and independent. Okay, so there is part of your vocational rehabilitation is to go and say, how can we retain your skills and your knowledge and your value to our business by adjusting the way you do things so that you can still deliver value. Okay, and that conversation is just completely so empowering to all persons involved. And I think that that's very important to remember, okay? Because a lot of people who acquire a disability, they also have all the same stereotypes and judgments about disability as other people do. And so there is often a great concern about well, an agreement that they might not be able to get back to work. And in fact, very often they can. I've just seen a question and touch on whose responsibility it is to introduce the reasonable conversation. That's a really great point. I'm going to get to that now. I just quickly want to wrap up here by saying health and safety. Again, it applies in health and safety. I was doing a presentation the other day to a company. It was quite funny because I was up on the first floor and I was doing a disability awareness training thing with the EXCO team. And the EXCO team said, well, yes, you know, we're very accessible. And I go, oh, that's really good to know. So he goes, yeah, we've got a particular area of our company that we employ disabled people. So I was like, oh, excellent. We've got our little sheltered employment section. And they were going, and, you know, we're very inclusive in our policies. And I said, well, that's great. But what about, you know, and I was asking about general inclusive policies around the whole business. Anyway, long story short, it became quite a fun debate. And we had a tea break and we went out, and the wheelchair accessible loo was on the ground floor and my training center room was on the first floor. So I said, I just need to use your bathroom. They said, no problem, it's just down the lift and you go to ground floor. Anyway, and then I went to push the lift button and the lift had broken. And I was like, this is interesting. Well, I'm glad you've got inclusive policies, because what does the policy say on getting somebody down the stairs to the bathroom in the event of the lifts going up? Because that's what happens if there's a fire. Your lifts get switched off. And they didn't know. They looked at me with blind panic. There was no evac chair. There was no policy. There was no way to get me out the building. And I was like, okay, so no judgment, because we don't know what we don't know until we know. But now you know. So can we have a show of hands and commitment from the EXCO to please just do a bit of an exercise to see, you know, from our policies and our environment perspective, let's do an audit, let's get some information, and let's start to know what we don't know so that we can mitigate. Okay, so we need to have a look at reasonable accommodation in its holistic thing. Where does the conversation, whose job is it? And I'm going to tell you, in reality, a lot of reasonable accommodation conversations come up because of a performance-based issue. So somebody that's employed with you already, their performance will start to waver, or there's some issue around behavior or performance, and the conversation starts, and then they go, well, actually, I've got this disability. Okay. The moment somebody discloses that they have a disability to you as an employer, you are legally obliged. You are obliged by law to reasonably accommodate that person. Okay. That's a non-discussion point. It is there in the law. What makes it very tricky is what is reasonable. Okay, so, and there you've got a guideline from the Code of Good Practice and the Technical Assistance Guide. They give you guidelines, but at this point, there is not a huge amount of benchmarks or guidelines that are practical and have been legally enforced. So what do? The onus is on you as an employer to have that conversation with that person and say, right, don't say shame, so what happened to you? And don't worry too much about all the medical mumbo jumbo, what. You want to say to them, okay, let's tackle this now. This is now a disability management issue rather than a performance management issue. If we can move or minimize or address the disabling factor, it should then correct the performance issue. Okay, if not, it's a performance issue. So the conversation starts with, what is disabling you? Let's understand the dynamic. What is disabling you? Is it an environmental thing? Is it an awareness thing? Is it an adjustment thing? Is it an assistive device thing? Have that conversation and say, okay, let's explore some solutions. And between the two of you, employer and employee, you have the conversation to say, let's explore some feasible solutions. Now, I want to tell you, in reality, as an employer, it is not, I'm not the expert in your disability as an individual, okay? I only have very sketchy knowledge on this. So I'm required, I'm leaning on you as the employee or the person with a disability to give me some insight, okay? But in reality, that person is not always particularly empowered, because especially if we're looking at learnership and work experience and entry-level roles, there's a lot of people with disabilities that haven't been taught how to manage their disability in the work environment. Okay, so that's where you turn to people like ourselves and you go, right, we're a little bit stuck. Our employees disclose they've got a disability. They don't really know all the solutions in this case. Can we get some advice? Okay, and we will go in and look practically. Whoever helps you, please make sure, firstly, you cannot approach this conversation from a pity, a social welfare, a special needs perspective. It has to be a really proactive and positive and practical conversation around what is disabling us and what can we do too, because it's disabling the employer and the employee, because you're not getting performance or productivity. Okay, the same with it in recruitment. The conversation is, this is great talent, we want them in our business, but we don't want anything to disable their ability to add value. So how do we have this conversation? Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to ask for assistance when necessary. You're going to educate yourself on what are the assistive devices out there. What technology do you need? I know at Bradshaw LeRoux, when we do this kind of a, support, we involve both parties. So we'll say to the employee, you tell us and go and do a bit of investigation. And then come back to the table and let's have a look at how feasible that is. In the meantime, the employer needs to be prepared to motivate for that flexibility or that adjustment or the assistive device. So legally, if an employer is shown not to reasonably accommodate, and it is actually quite a feasible maneuver, they can be taken to the CCMA, and there's a noticeable increase, by the way, of CCMA cases where this is occurring. So people with disabilities are getting to know their rights a bit more and are starting to be not very happy with the lack of proactivity in this department, okay? But I would also say that as an employer, it is not only your responsibility to do this, it is very much part of the individual with a disability to be part of exploring a solution and coming up with it. If you don't know, that's fine. Isolate what you don't know and go out there and get some help to advise and to support. Okay, right. I just want to address any questions. I've got a nasty habit of going over time. So let me just quickly have a look here. I'm interested to know more about accommodating visible disabilities. Okay, good question. Physical disabilities employers are able to set up front, however, if a person is challenged with a disability that is not immediately identified, and they choose to inform or declare, okay, what are the accommodations? All right, so let me just start with the first part there, the invisible disabilities. Okay, again, most employers feel comfortable with somebody with like a physical or visible disability they can see, because it's kind of a manageable parameter. So I'm a wheelchair user, I come to you, you go, well, yes, we can put a ramp there, and yes, we can make a bathroom that's accessible, and now you're good. Okay, it's definable. When it comes to non-visible disabilities, people get a bit more nervous because it's a fluctuating situation. So you might have somebody who's got anxiety and panic related disabilities. Okay, so they might have depression with anxiety related disorder. Okay, and you're going, oh gosh, all right, well, what does that mean? Again, it starts with a conversation. The conversation is, what are things that we need to know as an employer that that we can, or what can we do as an employer to assist you in managing the disability? Okay, the person's anxiety or depression or whatever, that is theirs to manage. So it's their responsibility to take their medication, to eat well, to rest well, to manage their circumstances as much as possible. And it's your responsibility as an employer to be part of that conversation to support. So we have cases, for example, where we've got somebody who has, we've just actually dealt with somebody that has major depression and anxiety and panic, which over COVID has obviously become a lot more noticeable, and they've disclosed. The employer's going, well, they didn't disclose this when we employed them, so legally, what are our things? And I'm going, that's not the conversation to have. Anybody can acquire a disability at any point. They have disclosed now. So let's just treat it as a conversation from this point on. Don't worry about what's happened before. This person, whether they've told you in recruitment or not that they've got a disability, they are here. There's a real issue, and it could have happened to them before or it could have happened to them after. It doesn't matter. They are here with a disability and they've disclosed it. Now the conversation is around what is disabling you and what can we do to support. So for this particular individual and in their particular circumstances, what was very stressing to them was the anxiety around getting to and from work and dealing with, at the moment, obviously with the public transport, the disruptions, just the dynamic at the moment, that COVID exposure in taxis and so on. That's what was getting them really anxious. So in this case, there was the option to say, all right, well, you need to come to work at least 3 times a week just to check in. And then the 2 days a week you can work from home, but we're going to keep it flexible. So as long as you've got no meetings on site, if you're feeling good that day, you can come in. If you're not, you can work from home, but we want an average. So we put the power in the individual's hands to be able to determine how they were feeling on the day, but there was an accountability to say, but you need to be here more reliably because there's team discussions, there's group conversations, and the nature of the job required some on-site intervention. Okay, interestingly, we put that in place, but what actually happened is that we also did awareness training with the team. So we said, guys, this is the situation, and with that person's permission, we were able to do a bit of sensitivity training. But ironically, what happened is so many people started to relate better to that individual because everyone was going, yeah, gee whiz, we're also feeling quite stressed. It's not a disability at this point, but we know exactly how you feel. And oh my goodness, we're stressed about this. And a conversation came up to say, well, let's support each other. And why can't we have a Teams meeting instead of an on-site? And the team actually came up with a great way to support each other so that they could still perform in the role, and everybody understood because they could all relate, and everybody found a way to sort of back each other. And it became a very, very positive engagement. Okay, so it's not all, for me, key successes, awareness leads to better understanding. When you've got better understanding of that individual's dynamics, you're better equipped to have a conversation to say, how can we address some of the disabling factors and how can we explore ways that will minimize those disabling factors? That usually involves some form of awareness or sensitization or a bit more of a respectful conversation about that individual's dynamics because it's better understanding. And that results in it being more normalized in a team. Okay, so in my experience, handled well, these things can actually be very positive engagements. What it also does is you as an employer are seen, where it gets around the coffee machine, let me tell you. You as an employer are seen to be respectful of the diversity of disability. You're seen to handle situations fairly and reasonably and with proactive conversations. What that is going to do is it's going to give people the trust to disclose their disabilities more openly. And that, realistically speaking, for HR always saying, we want people to tell us if they've got a disability or not, because we need to do our demographic scorecard. And we know people won't tell us. And we're going, well, that's because they don't trust you. So there's a tremendously positive way of positioning this disability disclosure and reasonable accommodation conversation to the point where it benefits and protects everybody. And handled right, it's certainly, your non-visible disabilities are becoming much more common, and it's a really good starting point actually to share the conversation. Physical disabilities, you can PR that more because people can see it, whereas invisible disabilities tend to be very relatable in some points to most of your employees. Okay, I hope that helps, and I'm going to stop talking there because I'm a big chatter. But you're welcome to give me a shout or drop me an email after this presentation so that I can answer any other questions that you might have. So I'm going to put my email address up on the chat screen now, but if anybody else has any questions, or Dineshri, you'd like to step in.
Thank you, Lesa, for such an informative presentation. There is one more question from Bina. What happens if the person does not disclose and their work performance suffers? Can you compel the person to disclose?
You can't, but what you can do is you can say, listen, here we are in a performance management discussion. Honestly, I suspect it's got something to do with a disabling factor, and I understand your reluctance not to want to disclose. But if you don't disclose, it is a performance management discussion. If you do disclose, it's a disability management discussion. And either way, the objective is to help you improve your performance. So if there's something that we can do as an employer to help you achieve that through a disability disclosure conversation, then let us do that. You know, it'll benefit everybody. So, but if they still don't want to disclose and it's not obvious to your employer, then it's a performance management issue, and that's how you have to deal with it.